right. Looks like we're getting a pretty good group. We have 28 on the webinar so far. We'll wait just about another 30 seconds or a minute to start, just so that everyone can get on. So just one moment here. All right. Well, we're officially at 1:01, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. So excited to have all of you here to discuss using cloud-based AI technology for remote language testing. I'm Joe Tomko. I'll be the moderator, and I'm president of Immersion Learning. And we'll quickly run through an agenda for the meeting, so you know how long this will be, and just so you know what to expect. So I'll start with a little overview and welcome our panel experts. We'll then go into about a 20-minute presentation on using cloud-based AI solutions, and then we'll finalize with the QA section at the end, around 1:30 to 1:40, and then we'll wrap up. We want to be cognizant of your time, so we'll be cruising right through on this. With your questions, I'm sure you'll have questions as we're going through. There's a little box at the bottom that says QA. As you have questions, please use the QA feature instead of the chat feature. That way, we'll hold those QA questions either until the end, or our Director of Marketing, Alec Gallego, will be responding to questions throughout the presentation as well. I did see one chat come in. We will have the presentation available afterwards as well to be shared with your colleagues and anyone else you'd like to share it with. So. But with that, welcome everyone. We're really excited to have you here, and I will be introducing now our esteemed expert panel. First off is Brigham Tomko, Chief Executive Officer of Immersion Learning. A little bio and background about Brigham is that he has experience living and working in several countries around the world. Brigham has an extensive background in language learning and international business. He's played a founding role in over 10 different startup companies in various industries. In addition to his role as CEO of Emmersion, he also serves as chairman of the board of Xylem Global, a private equity-backed investment holding company that he founded. And he sits on the boards of multiple universities, state agencies, and private companies. Brigham earned his JD MBA from the Marriott School of Business at BYU. He later returned to his alma mater as an adjunct professor of financing new ventures. So join me in welcoming Brigham. I know your audio's off, but we can welcome them virtually. We're excited to have him. Our second expert panelist is Dr. Jacob Burtis. And Jacob is really the linguistic and ed tech brains behind this. So we're excited to have him with us. Jacob is passionate about helping people improve their lives through education. He has dedicated his education, career, and volunteer service to using technology to make learning more effective and accessible. He has lived in Russia and Kazakhstan as both a volunteer and a tutor. Jacob saw firsthand the effect that education can have for individuals around the world. He also received a dual bachelor's degree in Russian language and linguistics and a master's and doctorate degree in educational technology from Brigham Young University. He first worked as a learning designer and language product manager for the Missionary Training Center in BYU in Provo. He was later recruited to join Pluralsight, which is a unicorn edtech startup, as the product manager for academia. Jacob co-founded Immersion Learning with a goal to leverage AI and technology to work toward closing the global communication gap, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. He also serves on the Interdisciplinary Studies Board at BYU, Idaho, and is an adjunct professor of product management at Utah Valley University. So we're super excited to have both Dr. Jacob Burtis and Brigham Tomko with us today. And without further ado, we'll turn it over to them for our exciting presentation today.
Thanks, Joe, for that introduction. And I'm excited to be here. I feel like I'm on Zoom calls all the time now, so this webinar feels pretty comfortable. We also, as a company, have employees all around the world and regularly get to use this technology. But we're coming here today to talk a little bit about why remote language testing is needed and how it's possible. So existing solutions for language interviews usually involve in-person interviews. These interviews are often time intensive, subjective, and not scalable. It's hard to do them quickly, and now that we're not face-to-face and we're all remote because of COVID, they're very difficult to do. Additionally, the data from an in-person interview lacks immediacy, specificity, and it often isn't personalized to help the person continue to learn. So artificial intelligence has made it possible to do remote testing for languages, not just in reading, grammar, vocab, but also in speaking. And AI allows for a reduced test length, more objective scoring, and it's infinitely scalable and can be done remotely. It also gives better accuracy and reliability and predictive insights on the feedback because of the data processing that's happening all throughout the test. We're kind of at an interesting time. The time is now. We've all been talking about digital transformation for years, and there's a few fun cartoons out there. I enjoyed this one with COVID-19 as a wrecking ball and saying digital transformation is years away. I don't see our company having to change anytime soon. The other one I enjoy floating around is the question of who powered your, or who started your digital transformation, your CEO, your CTO, or COVID. So many companies are feeling the acute pain right now of needing to leverage software to solve things that humans used to. Also, we're in a time of globalization where English is the language of business, and the ability to assess that worldwide quickly and accurately for hiring and educational placement reasons is very important. And finally, love this quote from Andrew Ng, that AI is the new electricity. AI is going to be what powers many of these software and devices that are part of the digital transformation.
All right, thanks, Brigham. So I'd like to just take a few minutes and talk about some of the nuts and bolts. What is it now about where technology is, what tools we have available to us that make it possible for us to do completely remote cloud-based testing while still being able to trust the results and use the results in a pragmatic way. So I'll talk a little bit about the components, about the industry, about different companies who are in this space who are using these tools in order to solve this problem. So as Brigham mentioned just briefly, we know that there's a large need, and the need is growing in terms of having digital solutions to provide these scores for language assessments. I just want to make sure we keep in mind that the most important question to ask first before diving into which tools are going to be most appropriate is what's the purpose of the results or the scores that you need. There's a whole range of the level of risk or the level of impact that a decision based off of these assessments will make. So for example, for entrance into a university, that's a very high risk, very impactful decision. It's still very important to make sure that you're taking the time and using methodologies, potentially a hybrid method of in-person and automated solutions in order to make such a substantial decision. But on the flip side, there are other decisions such as placement, such as progress testing or formative testing throughout a learning experience, or even low to mid stakes hiring decisions that don't carry as much weight or risk. And in those situations, it makes a lot of sense to use an automated solution that can be immediate. And so the essential components that really make this possible are first and foremost speech recognition. When we're talking about assessing speaking, this frankly wasn't possible before speech recognition got to the point where it is today. And a lot of large companies, basically any large cloud company now has a speech recognition engine that are doing phenomenal work, and the exponential growth in terms of their accuracy is really astounding. So being able to use and leverage the natural language processing and the speech recognition that's available and out there is one essential building block of making this possible. The next piece is psychometrics, the type of analysis, statistical analysis using Bayesian and other predictive models is an essential piece. So the field has grown significantly in terms of how can we take the data coming in, and again, as the speech recognition becomes more substantial, the amount of data and the specificity of data that comes in also grows. And so having smarter and smarter ways to use those data and package them and analyze them to give specific results also needs to grow along with it. And then, of course, this is a buzzword that many people have heard, but machine learning is absolutely crucial. And so using all of these big data, the data points that we're getting, and then being able to run them through these smart models that are finding and identifying which of these points of data and which configurations are working the best in order to predict what we're ultimately looking for, which is language ability. And just as a reminder, one of the difficulties about any sort of psychological evaluation, such as language ability, is it's what's called a latent trait, which means it's unobservable. You can't pick out the brain and see how well does this person understand language. All you get is the evidence that you have based on their ability to perform or their ability to comprehend. And so these models do become quite complex, and it takes a huge array of data and a really smart way to analyze the data in order to make these strong predictions so that your prediction can be valid and it can be pragmatic. So one of the advantages specifically for using AI or cloud-based solutions is the level of granularity that comes with these data. So I mentioned before, as speech recognition grows, as our methodologies in terms of which item types we're using to collect these data grow, we get information that obviously needs to conglomerate into an overall ability score, but there's also a whole list of information about different pieces of what components build towards that overall score, such as pronunciation, fluency and prosodics, vocabulary and grammar. These are important pieces that, as a human, if you're doing human-based interviews, there might have information, especially the higher trained that they are. They can specify some of this out, but usually there isn't time and there isn't the ability for them to say, here's your overall score, here's your pronunciation score, here's your fluency, here's vocabulary and grammar. It's usually outside of the scope, and that's something that AI computer technology can do really well. And on the flip side of that, something that's really exciting, and this has actually been growing in the last couple of years, is you can train the calibration data for your model to target very specific purposes for language assessment. So for example, if you're using this for flight attendants, or if you're using this for call center employees, for a specific area or industry, if you train the model using specifically those data, you can find different data points that can be very specific towards the purposes you're using for language assessment. And that's something that's very exciting. It's hard to do with a language evaluator to train them to become such to that point. But if you can gather the data, it can be very specific. So you can make sure that what you're testing is exactly designed precisely for the purposes that you need. So briefly, one of the exciting things for me personally about using technology and cloud-based testing is when you have the immediacy of feedback coming through, then you can start to do some really exciting things. So for example, if during a test-taking experience, you can determine someone's ability midway through that experience, then you can start to probe specifically for why this person is at the level that they are. So for example, if someone says, or if we use our tools to decide that someone is an intermediate language speaker, and as a linguist, I understand that intermediate language speakers struggle with these particular items in terms of vocabulary and grammar, then you can switch and start to probe now to find out which grammar principles they understand, which ones they don't understand, so that when you're providing feedback, more than just the overall language, you can begin to now provide the specific gaps that that individual has. And the ramifications of that are huge. When you start looking into how you can build remediation tools, then you can start to piece together a personalized learning path based on this particular individual's shortcomings and gaps, and then have a modular-based remediation program that's designed specifically for that person. I think once we get to that point, that's when we're going to start seeing language instruction really accelerate in terms of the outcomes that we can see faster and more efficiently. So I'll discuss really briefly So at Immersion Learning, we have an assessment, a speaking assessment called the TrueNorth assessment. And we combine data from three basically different sources. So we have language background data that we're able to obtain from test takers before they begin. That help kind of customize some of the experiences they have during the assessment. We use, for our part one, an elicited imitation, which is a fancy way of saying listen and repeat section. And maybe in the Q&A, if you have questions, we can get into some of those specifics. But we also collect spontaneous speech data. And so leveraging all of these different pieces together and using the machine learning and predictive modeling that I mentioned before, we can get to both an overall understanding and prediction of someone's ability. And then we're also increasingly able to then specify what some of the subcomponents of their ability are. And so for an example, here's a score report that we're able to give currently, where we can show our overall score from 0 to 10, and that's based off of our predictive model. But we also can show what that means roughly for some of the scales that are most important to our clients. So CFR, the Common European Framework of Reference, and some of the other scales that are important to students, we're able to estimate and give predictions for using this model. And so it's an exciting time to be in this field and industry. I think we're seeing a lot of transformation and change.
Great, thanks, Jacob. I want to share some case studies generally, but also some that are specific to Jacob and I and why we initially developed this technology. Many years ago, about 10 years ago, I have a business in the Philippines. We got a request to hire 500 English-speaking call center reps, and we had about 3 months to do it. I only had 2 HR professionals. And you think about hiring 500 people, you probably need to interview 2,000 people. And the pain for us was so acute, we didn't have a systematic way to assess the speaking ability of all of these people quickly. And I think my situation, drove me to help build immersion learning with Jacob, but it's also the pain point and problem that I think many corporate HR institutions feel. And it's that recruiters don't have the time or ability to screen the language ability quickly, accurately, and remotely. And the solution, as we've talked about, is leveraging AI-driven automated assessments that can be taken anywhere on any device and get immediate scoring. As we look at this, the ROI for my business and for our customers is, taking the recruiter out of that process saves 30 minutes of their time. The retention usually goes up with the employees because we're hiring the correct person who's qualified for their position. And you save thousands per year avoiding unqualified hires, the cost of training and putting them into work and then realizing that they don't fit. We work with many corporations in the corporate side of the business, as well as in their call centers, and even in their language service departments with translation and other services. Similarly, in education, my co-founder, Dr. Burtis, and mentioned in his bio that he was heading up language development at the Missionary Training Center. It's a unique institution where there's about 60,000 language learners who are learning over 100 languages, and they have between 8 and 12 weeks to know enough of the language to get out there. And Jacob was trying to figure out how he could assess their ability quickly to know how long they needed to study and to know if the learning methodologies that they were using were actually effective. And this highlights the problem in education in general, in that teachers can't quickly place students in the correct courses and evaluate their progress at the beginning and end of term. So it's not just the volume, but the volume usually has to happen in a very short period of time at the beginning and the end of a learning process. And one professor can't do it fast enough to accurately be able to help their classes. So solution, again, is AI-driven placement and progress language testing that allows for students to be evaluated simultaneously and also objectively. This saves evaluators time and also thousands of dollars in avoiding inaccurate placement, but also the students are much happier and are retained. Some of our over 600 university customers include Brigham Young University, Brown, Dartmouth, Columbia, and Penn, and many, many others throughout the country. We're now going to turn it over to Q&A time that Joe will moderate.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Brigham, and thank you, Jacob. Appreciate that. We're excited to answer some of your questions. And just a reminder, since this is a new feature that's available on the webinars, if you want to put any of your questions in the Q&A section on the bottom, we'll continue to answer those. We'll answer as many as we can here online, and then if there are any left over, we'll respond to them directly or chat responses to them. So the first question that we have is, what data do you have now that is specific to specific industries that we can target with your service? Or how would this apply to different industries?
Great, so I can speak to that briefly. The data that we currently have, it comes from basically 2 business units that we have. So I'll speak first to education. We have the TrueNorth assessment, which assesses speaking, that has been around for a couple years now. But in addition to that, we have what's called the WebCape placement assessment that's been around now for over 20 years. And there are millions of results from several hundred academic institutions, universities. And so combining those data, we're able to target fairly specifically in that business unit, the placement scores for multiple languages: English, Spanish, French, German, some of the main languages that you're familiar with. And so that's one area where we're using data to be more specific to target the placement for these different universities. One of the things that we're doing with that we're really excited about is we're beginning to conglomerate that into industry standards so that we can actually show new clients that come on, well, here's the average cut score that's being used for these different universities that you might want to apply as you're trying to tackle and solve this problem. And on the other business unit side, we're starting to gain specific data from call centers is probably one of our largest business units and subsets of data that we have. So working with clients such as Teleperformance, we're able to then target for their hiring purposes and the different levels at which they hire for. So we work in collaboration with them in order to identify what level of employer they're hiring and what are the specific needs. And then we can subset and categorize that data to be very specific to those. And so then the same thing, we're working on industry reports where we can have new clients that come on to say, here's kind of an aggregate or a standard that you can use to measure against that's successful in some of our other clients that are applying this. Some of the other industries that we're beginning to move into are specifically the financial industry for corporate HR and the hospitality industry for the different positions that they're hiring for.
Yeah. Can I follow on to that? But it actually answers part of one of the questions in Q&A, and I'll only answer half. And Dr. Burtis can answer a couple of the questions that are in there. But we do have that industry focus. But additionally, our breadth of languages, there's a question here on how many languages do you offer the assessment. That helps us to service many different industries throughout the world. Right now, our speaking test is automated in English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Japanese. We'll have German, Russian, Italian coming out soon, and we're also working on our Mandarin, Korean, and a couple of other languages right now. So we cover a wide variety of the major languages that are out there. Our non-speaking tests we also have in multiple languages: English, Spanish, French, German, and Russian, Mandarin, and a few others. So there's a breadth of languages in both our speaking tests and also our adaptive reading, grammar, and vocab tests. That answered part of the question. Dr. Burris, the second part said, do the results depend on how many individuals that have been assessed for each language?
Yeah, so we do require a certain number of calibration data in order to consider one of these assessments ready to be used. And so yeah, we do have a minimum number of calibration that we do on the R&D background before we can move forward with the assessment and say that this is suitable for use.
Awesome. Thank you, Jacob. Brigham, a question that came in for use would probably be well, either one, you may both have. But there's a question of scale. You know, how does this scale with numbers? What is the scale that my company or university can administer on the test at one time?
Yeah, we've obviously scale is an important issue, and we are testing in over 50 countries, meaning we have customers that are taking tests, so we can be all around the world at once. We've had customers who've started up to 500 tests simultaneously in Africa, and our system was able to handle that. So our core development team came from a large organization, a publicly traded learning platform that was focused on software learning, but their architecture that they've structured was built for worldwide scale, both in terms of volume at once, but also locations. We're based on cloud servers with Azure throughout the world, and so we're able to spin up and serve customers regardless of location.
Great, thank you. There was a great question that came in that Jacob responded to in text directly, but I think it'd be good for the whole group to understand. A question about, you know, this is obviously a speaking test, but does it have a component of listening comprehension as well?
Yeah, so I'll just speak to that briefly. When we talk about listening comprehension, there's bottom up and top down listening comprehension in terms of the skills being assessed, and using specifically the listen and repeat section, or the elicited imitation data. There's a lot of evidence that points to comprehension, listening comprehension, being one of the sources of variation for that response. For example, in a prompt, if a sentence is "that is a big tree," I'm just using dummy data here, and the submission from a student is "that is a large tree," big and large phonetically don't have anything to do with each other. So it's evidence that that's not them just parroting what they heard, but they actually were able to comprehend to a level, and then when they were reproducing, for whatever reason, the prompt word wasn't available to them, so they substituted with another word. But what that indicates, as we find those types of things in the responses, it tells us that their comprehension potentially was a little bit above their production for that particular prompt. And so we are, while in our current score report, we don't have comprehension or listening comprehension segregated, we're actively working on a model and being able to separate that out and say, here's the prediction from the assessment data that we have that can indicate listening comprehension as well. And we expect something this year for that.
Great.
And we do have in our WebCape product for English, there is a comprehension component that tests part of that.
Awesome. There's one quick question that I'll just answer. So someone asked, will the IELTS test be available remotely? So we are not the IELTS test, that's British Council, and they're actually, I think, some of them on the call here today, and we'd love to partner with them, and we partner with many others to help them with their remote testing, but we are not directly TOEFL or IELTS, so I've seen a couple of questions regarding that. I had, let's see, another question that came in here that would be great for you, I think, Jacob, to answer is, have there been any practices to ensure scoring reliability, specifically with TrueNorth, perhaps been administered and or scored by a live rater to ensure that the score is correct and that other linguistic nuances are captured? So maybe speaking, Jacob, about upfront what we do, as well as ongoing, how do we make sure that our tests are valid and accurate?
Yeah, so there's several layers to the scoring that we do. So the very base level layer is making sure that the speech recognition accurately captures the utterance that was said by the participant. So on that very base level layer, we do have a process where we train human language evaluators for all of the calibration data. And we make sure that the speech recognition is meeting at least a 0.9 or higher correlation in terms of inter-rater reliability with the human raters that come in. And so that usually takes several iterations for us to get to that level. So we have, for example, a set of data that we'll send to our speech recognition partner, and we'll run through and see how accurately it can compare to the human rating. Usually on the first try, it might be somewhere around 0.7, 0.8. And then we'll have to do several more iterations to train the speech recognition system to be more specific. And this actually goes towards another question that I saw come up, so I'll mention it here since it's relevant. One of the limitations of speech recognition, and when I say limitations, I also think it's an opportunity in terms of the amount of data that is continually being fed into this system, is how well can speech recognition differentiate between different idiosyncrasies from someone's first language. So for example, if someone's learning English from an Asian language, or from a Pacific island, or from a Latin-based language, how can the speech recognition differentiate, and does that affect the scoring of the tool? And so to answer that, the answer typically is it depends on how you're setting the parameters of what's accepted for the speech recognition. So basically, without getting too nerdy, the speech recognition is a series of numbers. And so it's taking each phoneme, which is a sound, and it's evaluating how well does that sound match what's expected or what the prompt is. So if the word is big, you know, the B sound, it's saying how well does what they say based on our model represent what that is. And so usually it'll give a number of how well it approximates what that is. And so that's on the sound level. It can build it up to the morpheme, or that's kind of the smallest unit of meaning, and it goes up to the word. And so you're making all of these determinations with the speech recognition to determine what are we going to consider acceptable. So for the purposes of our assessment, the parameters we want to make, we don't want this to be a pronunciation specific assessment, meaning if there's someone that comes with a relatively heavy or noticeable accent, but they're still intelligible by the average English speaker, we don't want to penalize their ability to speak. Of course, we would want to show that their pronunciation might need improvement, but so we set the speech recognition parameters in terms of what's acceptable to what is intelligible. And that's where we use the human calibration to set what those parameters are. And so right now, what we do is we feed as much of these different variety of speakers into one group in order to set what, for the broad assessment, is acceptable across all of these different language L1 speakers. We do imagine it'd be quite an undertaking, but we can see a path forward in the future of being able to then isolate. For example, if we know someone's coming from a certain language background, having a toggle automated so that the speech recognition can know to listen for some of the idiosyncrasies that are known for that particular language. I don't know, I hope that answers that question. I think there was a second question to the first one that you asked, Joe, that I didn't address.
I think that's great for now. And if anything is unanswered, please reach out to us, email us. We'll make sure to send you an email response directly. We have time for a few more questions. I have one for you, Brigham, that came in. So how does this tool actually save money and time? And maybe along with that, how does it provide value to my organization?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. If we add up the money component of it, if you're currently using a recruiter to, for instance, in a business setting, to interview people and give an opinion on their language ability, if you get to an interview and have to assess their language, that interview takes 20 or 30 minutes. Many of our call center clients actually put the language test out front before their recruiters ever talk to their applicants. So once they're already language screened before they get to their recruiting process, particularly for roles where language is the #1 requirement for that job, which many of the global jobs do have that requirement. So it saves that time of the recruiter, but the bigger one, it's a little harder to quantify. It's kind of organization by organization. But if you hire someone who ultimately isn't qualified for their job, it typically takes, a month or 2 months to determine that you made the wrong hire, and it can be many thousands of dollars and, lost customers. We have many case studies and stories of where clients were losing customers because of the quality of language ability that their employees had, and were able to do that. So both both the time and the money. Compared to other speaking tests that are out there that involve humans, they can be from $50 to $200 per test. This test at enterprise scale is under $20, and in some cases, in our very large clients, it gets down to $5 or $6 per test. So it's inexpensive. You can assess more people with the test. And I don't know if we've mentioned this, but our entire test process is about 15 to 20 minutes. So it's very short and user-friendly for the applicants as well.
Awesome. I was actually just going to ask that as a follow-along, or a follow-on question, so that's great. Jacob, a great question that's been very relevant in our business right now. So Brigham mentioned we're launching several new languages, but someone asked, how long would it take to develop a new language if they had a specific need and they wanted us to develop that language for them?
Yeah, that's a scary question to answer, but I'll do my best.
Yeah.
It depends on how much development has been done in that language in the speech recognition arena. So if it's a common language, maybe one of the top 20 or 30, then what the process usually is about 3 to 4 months of work with us being able to identify, find, and obtain the calibration data we need, get the language expert to create the prompts, and then go through several iterations of training before we can come to a model that we feel comfortable with. So that kind of gives a high level idea. Just to say, depending on, again, how obscure the language is, it may take more time if what we need to do is also provide substantially more data to increase the accuracy of the speech recognition tool to the level of accuracy that we require for our scoring algorithm.
Just a follow on to that, there's existing speech recognition, Google Voice or IBM Watson or Carnegie Speech. And what Jacob was saying, depending on how much training we have to give to make those engines accurate, and some of them, the obscure languages, there aren't even existing platforms that cover them, and so like Jacob said, it depends.
Awesome. There's a question that I think was just answered. So what does it cost to use your platform? So I think Brigham just answered that. It varies based on volume and based on how many tests you need per year. And we can send you a custom quote based on your specific needs. Jacob, I think probably one final question, and then I'll have some parting notes and a parting gift for all of our attendees as well. So the question is, there's, at AI, sometimes people don't trust AI, right? It's computerized, it's this new technology. How can it be trusted? And specifically, how can you make sure it's not biased? And that's the question. Or maybe talk to us actually about how it improves bias, right? That us as humans all have bias as well. And so if you could talk about that.
Yeah, let me speak broadly, then I'll get specifically to this. Broadly, there should be a question around the bias of AI. I mean, it's only as good as the data that you use to train it. So I know in some fields, for example, if the people who are setting up the AI and collecting the calibration data aren't being careful to be inclusive in terms of who they're pulling the data from, then the machine doesn't know any different. And so it will naturally be biased by the subset of data that it gets. So for example, I know in a lot of specifically, HR or compensation or other type of industries, if it's only pulling from a subset of data, that might be middle class or, certain racial or other types of groups, and it's not being all inclusive, then I think there is a danger and there's a worry to question, has this data been confirmed? Now, on the flip side, for what we do specifically, being able to include, again, as much of a variety of speakers as we can, and having it predict something like language ability, where that's not usually as subject to differences, among social classes and things like that. I think there's a little bit less of a concern, but it still is a concern. And so we've been very careful, both with the speech recognition partners that we use and the data that we use, and also the calibration that we have, to be very inclusive in terms of the calibration data that we feed into the system. And so that kind of addresses some of the inherent bias that might come with AI. But on the flip side, as you mentioned, one of the benefits is we've actually done studies with some universities where we've been able to compare the reliability between they have multiple raters doing a speaking assessment and then our tool. And we found that our tool was more consistently reliable than their raters, and that makes sense. A lot of times human raters, if they're not highly trained, can be fooled by things like charisma and pronunciation. So if you have a student who's overly, from a personality standpoint, able to communicate, it might sometimes trick the rater into thinking that they're actually more able than they actually are. So those types of biases can be removed by using more of an objective scoring method, such as the AI power test that we've mentioned today.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you, Jacob. And thank you, Brigham. That's all the time we have for Q&A right now. But I would, like I said, we would love to thank you for being here. We're grateful to have you here. And as a goodwill gesture and as a parting gift, we'd like to give you all a free business improvement audit, as well as we'll send out a 20% discount for everyone who attended this call for a pilot. So for any new clients that want to try it out, we'll give you a 20% discount, and we'll have a code that you can redeem because you were here and attended this event. I'd also like to just thank all of you for being here. We know you're all very busy, and especially right now with COVID-19 and the craziness, and all of your businesses are changing, right? The whole world is changing before our eyes. And so we're grateful for your time here. We would love to follow up with you each individually. And I know there were quite a few questions that we were not able to get to. And so we will try to respond to those directly. And we'll also, please email us if you have additional questions. And that information is listed here as well. A lot of it is found on our website as well, but we would love to answer any and every question you have and would be more than happy to give you a free business consultation as well. Just before we wrap up, thank you, Brigham and Jacob. We really appreciate your presentation as well as your Q&A. Any parting words from you before we end the webinar?
Nope, just happy to be here and hope everyone is safe and well with COVID.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Same. I just wish everyone stay safe. Please reach out to me directly if you have any other questions regarding the assessment and how we do what we do. We're happy that we can. Our whole purpose is to provide an option for assessment that, like I mentioned earlier, isn't as high stakes as admission to university, but then again is suitable for hiring decisions, placement, progress. We're trying to provide a solution that is effective and economic for everyone.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you both once again for your time, and thank you to all of our attendees. We hope you have a great rest of your day.